Welcome everyone to this webinar today, from single-use to reuse, reprocessing medical devices safely. We will be with a lot of participants today, so I'll be waiting a little bit so everyone can join. If you want, you can already put your name, organization, and maybe your role in the chat. So we know who you are. You can engage with other participants too before we dive into the actual content of this webinar. But very welcome this afternoon. It's great to see you here. And we'll be happy to present in a few moments. So very welcome. I see already one person in the chat, a colleague from the US. Welcome, Caroline, as well. Thanks for joining. All right. I see people are starting to engage in the chat. Thank you very much for this. I think we can then officially open the webinar. So welcome everyone this afternoon. We are going to talk a little bit more about reprocessing. If you go to the next slide, Amelia, then I will give you a few practical information before we dive into the content. So the slides and recording will be shared after the webinar. Please stay muted. If you want to say something or you have a question, use the chat. And there will be AI translations available through the closed captions feature. Then the agenda for this meeting on the next slide will give an introduction to reprocessing, of course. So we all know what we're talking about exactly. We will explore a bit more about the role of reprocessing in healthcare. Then we also have a more practical case from Denmark. And there will be a global overview of the medical device regulation here in the EU. And there will be a bit of a focus on what's going on with the medical device regulation right now, and how you can submit your feedback in the process. So this is the agenda. I'm not here alone today. I have a few very interesting speakers. So I would like to introduce Daniel Vukelich, CEO of the Association of Medical Device Reprocessors. Then there's also Clément Roest, country manager from the Netherlands and Belgium from Vanguard. And then there is also another colleague, Ginevra Jasse, who is the policy officer in Healthcare Without Harm Europe. So first of all, I would like to ask you a question. And there's a poll that just popped up on your screen normally. And we want to ask you what best describes your organization's current experience with medical device reprocessing. And you see the answers, and then you can answer the question in the poll in Zoom. And then I see a few people already answered here. And I think most people don't have experience with reprocessing, but I also see that a lot of people are exploring or assessing reprocessing. So that's really interesting to know. We are aware of reprocessing. I see 5 people answered this, and 6 people up till now of the 40 people that answered are currently reprocessing single-use medical devices. So please keep on submitting your answers on the poll. It's very interesting to see and to know what's going on in hospitals and other healthcare facilities. So thank you very much for contributing to this. And then we will start, of course, with more explanation on what reprocessing entails. So here you see a basic definition of what reprocessing is, reprocessing of single-use devices. It basically allows its safe reuse after cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilizing the single-use device. And of course, it's also tested afterwards, and you restore the safety and performance of the used device to make sure it also doesn't compromise patient safety. Then we worked on an infograph together with our circular healthcare working group that you can see here, because we have the feeling that not everyone understands the full process, and that's why we created this together with members and participants in that working group, external stakeholders, hospitals, healthcare practitioners, and so on. And this is something we published on our website, just for you to know, because we think it's really important that people are aware of what reprocessing entails. So we will disseminate this further, and hopefully you can, if you already follow Healthcare Without Harm Europe, you can also share this on your accounts, of course. And then a few words on reprocessing and supply chain resilience. There's a lot of benefits to reprocessing that Clément and Daniel will explain you in a lot more detail later in their presentations. But on the next slide, you will see that it is also very important for your supply chain resilience to look into reprocessing as a healthcare facility. Now, what is supply chains resilience? It means that you're able to handle shocks. We all know the crisis in the past, COVID-19. We just had the crisis, the Strait of Hormuz, where ships were blocked when they wanted to transport oil that's necessary for medical devices. And if you rely on single-use medical devices, your supply chain is under a lot of pressure. Prices can rise because there are shortages, or you just can't get the right product that you need. So how can reprocessing help? It ensures a more reliable supply chain of essential medical devices, but it also creates a more local, more flexible supply chain. And this is really an important part of circularity as well. So if you work in a linear system, so you have a single use, you use it and you throw it away, then of course you can have a lot of problems when a crisis hits. But reprocessing is also part of a circular process, which we really want to highlight here, that it's important to not just look at single use, but really to close the loop and reuse single-use medical devices. And it also reduces then, of course, the reliance on new manufacturing of critical devices, and you can, as a health system, better withstand disruptions and at the same time maintain patient care, because of course that's a very important point, that you can, in all things that are going on in the world, that you can always make sure that you can have continuous care. And then I would like to introduce, or give the floor at least, to Daniel Vukelich, who will give you a very interesting presentation of the role of reprocessing in healthcare. The floor is yours, Daniel.
Tatiana, I really appreciate the introduction. My name is Dan Vukelich. I'm the president of the Association of Medical Device Reprocessors, or AMDR. We're a US and European-based trade association that represents the regulated commercial single-use device reprocessing and remanufacturing industry. Just one word on nomenclature. You'll hear we're using the words reprocess and remanufacture in today's webinar. And I think we all generally understand the term reprocess to refer to what is done in hospitals, namely to reusable devices, to clean, decontaminate, sterilize, and send back up for use in the operating room or on the patient floor. You can also reprocess some single-use devices, and depending on where you are in Europe, that may be happening within the health institution. As Geneva is going to talk about later, this single-use device reprocessing is now subject to medical device manufacturing requirements in Europe. And so the nomenclature or the words that we use for regulated commercial reprocessing of single-use devices, meaning those that are subject to full medical device manufacturer requirements, is remanufacture. And so that's a term increasingly used by the companies I represent. I'll not go over it here today, but Clement later, on behalf of one of the major commercial reprocessors, will talk about how exactly it is that they demonstrate conformance to medical device manufacturer requirements. All right, if you'll move on to the next slide. Healthcare Without Harm asked me to address safety. And so let's address that right out of the gate. When regulated, the remanufacturing of single-use devices is safe and effective. We've been regulated by the United States Food and Drug Administration since 2000, in Germany since 2002, and now in Europe since 2017. And some of that very early data demonstrated that there is no evidence that reprocessed single-use devices created an elevated health risk for patients. In fact, over 26 years, all of the peer-reviewed data and independent papers continue to demonstrate that regulated remanufacturing of SUDs is safe and effective. In fact, on the next slide, you'll see there are some studies that demonstrate that reprocessed single-use devices that meet manufacturer requirements may exceed or at least fail less than original equipment manufacturers. This study, which looked at ultrasound devices, found that the reprocessed devices failed far less frequently than the original equipment. Why? AMDR members test or inspect 100% of the devices that they place on the market. And so we're very happy and confident in the safety record of our products. If you move to the next slide, another reason that I think we're here today is that remanufacturing of single-use devices is under enormous threat, particularly from the original manufacturers, or at least some of the original manufacturers, who see every reprocessing or remanufacture of a single-use device as a lost sale. There's been major litigation in the United States between a division of Johnson & Johnson and one of the major commercial reprocessors. Johnson & Johnson lost for, I think, $464 million. But the evidence revealed at trial that even a J&J sustainability manager was trying to collect spent SUDs to prevent them from getting in the hands of the commercial reprocessor. And S3 is the name of the commercial reprocessor in the United States, which was their shorthand for Stryker Sustainability Solution. But the quote here is, if we collect all the devices, we could cut off their supply chain and crush them. Boo ha ha ha. And we're seeing the same sorts of collection efforts in Europe. And so we're here today, or at least I'm here today, to take advantage of this opportunity to be transparent, to talk about the threats to this potential business model, and to talk about the benefits to European healthcare and hospital systems. If you'll move to the next slide, just to get a little bit more into why it is that you would reuse a single-use device, we have a moral imperative in healthcare. In the same way that when it was discovered that smoking is probably not that good for your health, clinicians really took up the moral charge and stopped recommending that patients smoke and started to educate them to not smoke. And similarly, we have a duty in healthcare to do no harm, but that also has to include the environment in which we're using all of these medical devices in order to make people healthier. If we're making people healthier, but make patient populations sicker by creating an enormous environmental problem, we have a duty to act. And so as outlined on this slide, one major study out of the UK showed that up to 80% of a hospital's emissions are coming from the operating room, and mainly from single-use devices. Globally, 70% of all emissions from hospitals are scope 3, or the supply chain, meaning all the drugs and the devices and the stuff used that we deliver healthcare. And so we have a particular responsibility to reduce, if we can, all of the emissions coming from the supply chain. And you may all have seen this statistic before, but if healthcare overall was a country, it would be the 5th biggest polluter on Earth. It is also responsible for 5% of all global emissions. We're in the healthcare business. We're not supposed to be making people sicker because of the way we do our business. We should be making them healthier. And so in the next slide, I want to highlight the data that we have in support of SUD remanufacturing. At amdr.com, you'll find these resources, but we now have 50 plus peer-reviewed studies demonstrating the preferability of reprocessed or remanufactured SUDs in terms of safety, efficacy, cost, waste, or emissions. We now have over 25 years of clinical experience and data in the US and now increasingly in Europe. And now AMDR has been collecting and releasing data annually on the amount of emissions we reduce to our member or participant hospitals year over year. If you move to the next slide, you'll see all that goes into the production, at least from one study that we looked at, in this instance of a cardiology catheter. We often don't think about it, but the global supply chain and the raw materials that we extract from Earth are enormous in order to make a medical device. You can see all the different points of production or distribution that are used just in the making of a cardiology catheter. And on the next side, you can sort of see that what we've started to look at are life cycle assessments, or ISO 14040 compliance studies, to assess the true environmental benefit of SUD remanufacturing, which looks at the total life cycle of a product to assess its consumption of raw materials, its emissions associated with manufacturing or transport or packaging. And in the next slide, you'll see the study summaries that we've seen for the life cycle assessments that the commercial remanufacturing industry has issued. Looking at 8 different devices published in 4 different studies, we were able to estimate the carbon reduction associated with reprocessed or remanufactured devices in these main categories. And on the next slide, you'll see the summary of that data, which is also available on AMDR's website. But overall, by reusing a single-use device through a regulated remanufacturing entity, you can cut emissions generally in half. On the next slide, you'll see why. And frankly, we didn't know why. We weren't even sure when we conducted these initial studies if reprocessing would be environmentally preferable, because after all, we also do a lot of transportation. We also do sterilization. We also do packaging. We also go through a lot of water and detergents. But what each of these life cycle assessments are showing are the incredible carbon intensiveness of extracting from the earth raw materials such as oil or metal to make the materials to make these devices, such as the plastic from oil refinement that goes into the handles of electrosurgical devices, or the metal components that go into just about any of these devices. And so a reprocessor, meaning manufacturer requirements, can use a previously used device in the manufacture of a new device and cut out the most carbon intensive process of manufacturing, which is collection of the raw materials and extraction necessary. On the next slide, you'll see that, well, I'm sorry, that was just my point. So the next slide, and by the way, all of those life cycle assessments are available at amdr.org. I'm going to gloss over this because Clement is going to address this as well. We consider this a circular business model. In fact, I would contend that the single-use device remanufacturing industry is the largest and most important example of circularity in terms of what is commercially available for medtech products. In addition, our products cost less. We are less vulnerable to global supply chain challenges and therefore more resilient. So far, this is a comprehensive list of the medical devices that are cleared or approved in largely the US. In the EU so far, we have cardiology devices in that category column on the left, and then some surgical devices, mainly in the laparoscopic area. And Clement will go over some of the product offerings there. But we're seeking to expand the product offerings in Europe with the implementation of the EU MDR as well. That carbon calculator that I mentioned earlier the carbon calculator that we put together is based off of those life cycle assessments. And so you can use this QR code, which will take you directly to this calculator. This is a way that hospitals can, in a scientifically rigorous way, begin to estimate the reduction in carbon that they're creating by remanufacturing single-use devices. And then just a couple more elements. Healthcare without harm, I think, can underscore this point as well. But if resilience and cost savings and emission reduction aren't reasons enough, our patients and our healthcare workers want healthcare to be greener and more resilient. And you'll see on the final slide here, in addition to workers, our patients are expecting it as well. Well, thank you very much. I think I'm right at time. We may have time for a couple of questions, and then I'll turn it over to Clement.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for presenting. I think I sent a message to the chat, so if you have any questions about what you just heard, you can put them in the chat, and I will ask Daniel to respond.
Yeah, the question is, do you think that AMDR members are ahead of the digital product passport requirements that will be coming in? I'm not sure. I will know that because we need to keep track of all of the information associated with the original equipment, for instance, that UDI number, that we perhaps have a leg up, but I'm not experienced enough to be able to say anything about digital product passports just yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second is in GI. I don't believe that there are much offered here in Europe in terms of gastrointestinal devices. Laparoscopic surgical instruments, yes. And so maybe in those procedures, such devices would be used. But that's a product area that we hope to expand and more in Europe. And then the last question, there's two more questions. How often can a device be reprocessed? And it depends. And it is up to the reprocessor or the remanufacturer to demonstrate with validation data how many times the device can withstand the reprocessing regimen. So an electrosurgical scalpel might get 2 or 3 uses, but an EP catheter might get 5. But it really depends on the durability of the product and the validation of the cleaning process. Are there lists of devices allowed to be reprocessed according to the Joint Commission International? No, not that I know of. Ultimately, we're now subject to the same requirements as any other medical device manufacturer. So those devices that have received a CE mark will be in the Unimed database, just like any other device manufacturer. And so there will be a way to assess that information. There's more coming, but why don't we save it to be respectful to the other speakers?
Yeah, maybe you can still answer a very last question. I think there's quite some questions here. So if there's still one you would like to answer.
There's a question about, what if a company doesn't provide cleaning instructions on how to clean something and it's intended for single use? Our company doesn't want to use it again for safety reasons. That's a good question as to what the single use label is all about. I don't want anyone to take away from my presentation that hospitals should begin to reuse single use devices in-house. There's not been a cleaning validation. There's no cleaning instructions. It subjects the individual health institution or individual to liability. But the device is labeled for single use because the manufacturer chose that. Hopefully they chose it because they don't think it can be cleaned and reused. But some have chosen to label a device for single use because they simply elected not to do a cleaning validation. And so their commercial SUD remanufacturer stands in their shoes and does the cleaning validation and markets the product under their name in order to place that product back on the market.
All right. Thank you very much, Daniel, for answering these questions and also for the presentation, which was very interesting also to see some of the history of reprocessing, because it goes back in time, and to get some more interesting numbers as well on emission reduction and so on. So next, I would like to highlight a very short case study, the case of Denmark. And you will see that in Denmark, if you go to the next slide, so reprocessing has been allowed since January 2025. And there was a very intense working group with multiple stakeholders from healthcare policy, but also from the industry, to have a look at the process and to give input as well. And we see that, for example, in Region Midtjylland, that's what an organization or a region that we're also collaborating with. There's one department who's sending heart catheters to Vanguard, and As Daniel also mentioned, the emission reduction, you can also see here that in very early analysis, it already shows a reduction of 54%, which is a lot, of course. And another important point that was highlighted before is not just the emission reduction, but also the fact that you can really save budget, you can save money by reprocessing single-use devices. As you can see here, there's a big cost reduction, and 320,000 euros per year was saved only for this one product. So that's a very, very high budget that you can save. And then, of course, it's still a process that can be a bit challenging sometimes because of the legal framework, logistics, or lack of capacity. But as you saw, that there's several ways that you can reprocess. You can do it in-house, but then, of course, you can also do it external with one of the companies that are presenting today. And then we can go to the next presentation from Clément Roust from Vanguard, who will highlight a little bit more the regulatory framework of reprocessing. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clément Roust. I'm country manager for the Netherlands and Belgium at Vanguard AG. Vanguard is a German company that has been remanufacturing single-use medical devices for more than 28 years. Our slogan is Rethink, Remanufacture, and that perfectly captures what we stand for. Let me start with the three pillars that define our work. First, sustainability. Instead of discarding a device after one use, we can safely remanufacture it and bring it back into the clinical workflow. This reduces waste and supports a circular health system. Second, the economics. For hospitals, remanufacturing is financially very attractive. Savings can reach up to 50% compared to buying new devices. And third, safety. Every remanufactured device meets the same safety and performance standards as a new one. Safety is always the top priority. Going into how does the production work process work? Let me talk you through the process step by step. After the procedure, the device is pre-cleaned. This is easily done with a water moisture swab to remove retained tissue and blood. It is essential that the complete original label is placed with the device into the bag. On the label, there are important data like the company's name, product number, batch code, use before date, and so on. After the pre-cleaning is made, we can collect it on the department. So we pick it up on the floor, bring it over to our facilities in Germany, and then they will be inspected and get an identification. When a product will be at us for the first time, we will laser a 10-digit code on the device, and every data, what was on the label, is also compared to this digit code. And for then on, the device is trackable. Then the remanufacturing means that it could be that we dismantle the product, so we can piece by piece cleaning it. But instead, by example, for the ablation catheters, we clean them, and for the catheters with lumen, we clean them also inside. We have patented cleaning machines who fully validated with data, clean the product. And after that, they will be tested. Every device is tested by us. And then from that on, they go to sterile packaging and sterilization. And after that, it's final packaging and shipment and ready to bring it over to the customer. The certification pathway, there are two defined certification routes. The first one is common specifications on the left side. Except in Germany, common specifications are currently not possible because no notified body is able to validate them till now. We are actively working on enabling this pathway in the near future. So we're talking for the products about CE certification. And CE certification means that the manufacturer is considered the original manufacturer, including full liability. For CE validated devices, we purchased used items, remanufacture them, and return them to the market. Because each device receives a unique identification number, we can also return your own device back to your hospital or replenish your stock. Where is CE manufacturing possible? Here's an overview from the countries where CE manufacturing is currently allowed. It's depending on each country to give an allowance in the law for it. And as you can see, France will start a pilot program in the Q3. This is an overview for our current product portfolio. To give you an insight, we have 274 different articles in the diagnostic catheters we can remanufacture, 75 for the 3D mapping catheters, and so on. Then the difference between remanufacturing versus recycling. It's a quick but important distinction. Remanufacturing restores a product so it can be used again. Recycling dismantles the product and only the raw materials are reused. The device itself is no longer usable. Okay, that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Clément, for your presentation. I see there were some questions in the chat. For example, here I see a comment, how are the catheters transported, shipped to Vanguard? How does the European Waste Catalog classification apply?
Yeah, but when I'm speaking for the Netherlands and Belgium, we collect the items with the hospital at the department, requested what they give us to pick it up with a courier. And most of the time when they send an email or give a call, and most of the times in 1 or 2 days, it will be picked up, and the next day it's on one of our facilities, which can start with remanufacturing.
Okay, thank you very much. I see another question here. Should a single-use device be decontaminated before being sent for reprocessing, remanufacturing? That was a question from earlier.
Yeah, there are exceptions in the law, of course, when a device is used, by example, a patient with Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease. When you know it, there's also a procedure in the hospital. You have to take out this product, and there's a list in the article in the MDR for the different devices for what will be taken out of this. But nevertheless, it could occur that you help a patient and the device is sent to us, and after that you will notice there is a disease was on it, when the device is manufactured, it's clean when it's coming back. It meets the same specs as a new device, so nothing can occur. And in the last 28 years, we do remanufacturing never occurred. But we also do, well, depending on the items, but by example, with a lumen catheter, we also do laboratorium research to be 100% sure the lumen are clean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for this answer. I think there's some other questions here as well. Do you work to bring the costs down to compare remanufactured to single-use items and make them more attractive?
Again, the question? Can you say the question again?
Yeah, if you work to bring the costs down, it was highlighted before that it brings costs down to compare remanufactured to single-use items. Do you have some more information on how you bring or how much you bring the cost down, Daniel? Also,
yes, depending on the device. It's also depending on the word of the device, because our process is also a cost process. So the more expensive devices are interested to remanufacture. Mm-hmm. But for the device, we remanufacture a lot in the OR environment. The savings are up to 50%. It's also depending on the hospital's contract, in which price they will get, and so if nevertheless, but it's also worth another penny, because you're also making savings in the CO2, mm-hmm. and it's also, as you explained, an answer to the shortage in the world.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. And Daniel, you also wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, so there's up to a 50% savings, as Clement and some of the slides have pointed out. And there's also the reduction in waste removal costs. There's also the reduction in carbon and built resiliency. But the data we've seen out of the United States is that for particularly non-invasive devices over the last 25 years, because of the competitive pressure that reprocessing brought, the original equipment prices came down. Just like generic drugs force brand name drugs to come down. And so if we don't adopt remanufacturing of SUDs more rapidly in the EU, the manufacturers have no incentive to reduce their prices. And right now, most governments are going first to the original manufacturers to negotiate how many units they need and buying a bulk-based discount. But if you start with the remanufacturing, you can reduce the amount of new devices you need. So not only are you saving per device, but you're reducing the consumption of new devices. So maybe you don't need 5 million scalpels. Maybe you only need 4 million, because through reprocessing or remanufacturing. So the cost savings is huge, but we need to start the negotiations on reman first, not OEM first, because if we do that, that places everything on volume and not value-based procurement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very, very good comment. Thank you very much, Daniel. And then maybe a final question that I see here from Trude. Clement, could you please comment on the developments in your portfolio, how you prioritize which products to start reprocessing?
Yeah, prioritization is made by what is happening into the market, but the business model is also thought about the amounts of how many pieces will be used. When a product is used really a lot, it could be interested to make a case from it, but the case will be made by us, by product management. And although it's not that when you want to have a product into your catalog, it will take time. So it's a long-term process for validation, and for CE, normally it could be running up to 2 years before you get a certification for it. And also compared to the cost of a validation is depending which materials will be brought into our portfolio.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I see there's another few questions. So if you have time, you can always answer them in the chat, of course. For example, there's one on devices with multiple components, and there's other questions coming in. But thank you very much again for this presentation. And then we will go to the next part. That will be presented by my colleague, Ginevra Jasse, on the medical device regulation revision. And she will explain to you a little bit more what's going on and also the opportunity that there is right now to promote reprocessing. Floor is yours, Ginevra.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tatiana. I thank you also for the great presentation that we heard before from Daniel and Clement. We really see the benefits of reprocessing, and also we saw from Clement what is currently possible under the existing regulatory framework in Europe, and then I will dive in more in depth into the medical devices regulation revision that is currently undergoing. But before that, I would like to understand who is joining us today and your experience with reprocessing. So we prepare 2 quick questions. So the first one will be, do you believe the safe reprocessing of single-use medical devices will be more widely adopted across the EU? Okay. I see many positive answers. That's good. Well, yes, more than 90% of the audience think that single-use, the safe reprocessing will be more widely adopted across the EU. So that's a positive answer. So yes, I think we can move to the next question. So when a medical device can be safely reprocessed and reused, what do you think should be the preferred option for healthcare systems? So reprocessing should be prioritized over purchasing a new single device. Reprocessing and new single-use devices should be considered equally. New single-use device should remain the preferred option, or you're not sure?
And I can see from the answers here that the first one is a preferred option. So reprocessing should be prioritized over purchasing a new single-use device. So that's interesting for us to know, of course, how you feel about it. Some still think that reprocessing and new single-use devices should be considered equally, but most of you chose the first one. Some are still not sure, but I think 60 of you voted and 41 chose the very first answer. Thank you very much for answering.
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, that's a positive answer. So 70% of the audience said that reprocessing should be prioritized over purchasing a new single-use device. Okay. Okay, thank you so much for joining this poll. So now we can move on to the medical devices regulation revision. So as Daniel mentioned before, the Commission published a targeted revision in December 2025. And for the first time, the European institutions are discussing not only how reprocessing should be regulated, as we saw before also from Clement presentation, but also when manufacturers should be allowed to label a device as single-use. One of the most interesting elements for today's discussion, so I won't focus on, of course, all the revision of the medical devices regulation, but mostly on the of the new revision of Article 17 on single use devices and reprocessing. We very much welcome this proposal because for the first time it introduces an explicit requirement for manufacturers to justify when a medical device is labeled as single use. So in other words, manufacturers will need to demonstrate that a device cannot be safely reused after it has been properly reprocessed. So this is a very important step forwards. So it's important for greater transparency, greater manufacturer accountability, but also to ensure a more harmonized European approach to reprocessing, which under the current regulation is not the case. And also for all the benefits that we saw before that reprocessing entails. So sustainability, resilience, and also safety, patient safety. However, just I wanted to share with you latest update that we received yesterday. So yesterday, the Parliamentary Rapporteur published this draft report, which takes a different approach from the Commission proposals. So now the rapporteur responsible for this file says that it's up to the manufacturer to choose and prove whether a device is single use or can be reprocessed. So also it's important to say that an exception is made for devices that use only in hospitals. In this case, manufacturers have to include a reason justification on why the item can't be reprocessed safely. So we can say that the draft report shifts the emphasis towards the manufacturer choice rather than starting from the principle that manufacturers should justify a single-use designation as it was in the Commission proposals. So from our perspective, it's very important that the final revision continues to require a robust justification for single-use designation. And we wanted to stress that this should be based on patient safety and clinical necessity, and also the essential characteristic of the device. So not only by design choices. So that's why we also believe that the Commission approach should be safeguarded and where possible further strengthened. So that's why we also think that it's important to strengthen where possible Article 17, because as currently drafted, even if we said that it's a very important step forwards as manufacturers should justify single use. In the proposal, the manufacturers are asked to justify why the device they have placed in the market cannot be safely reprocessed. Not that it couldn't have been designed to be reusable in the first place. So in this case, we believe that when manufacturers choose to label a device as single use, they should demonstrate using robust, objective, and verifiable evidence that safe reuse is not possible because of the clinical purpose of the device, even when validated reprocessing methods are available. So to wrap up, in other words, single use should be justified by clinical necessity and essential characteristic of the device, not by design choices that can prevent reprocessing. So I want to stress that this doesn't mean that all medical devices should become reusable. Of course, there will be always devices that for which single use is the safest or also more appropriate option. So where are we now? Just to give you an overview of the legislative process. So as I said, in December 2025, there was the publication of the Commission proposals. And so for the first time, we saw that Article 17 introduced the requirements for manufacturers to justify when a device is designated as a single use. Then now we are in July 2026. We saw already the draft report by the European rapporteur and the change of direction that I explained before. And more importantly, I want to stress that now CARB is still open the public consultation. So the European Commission is still inviting feedback on the proposals. So please, you have until the 3rd of August to submit your feedback. And after that, after summer and then in December, there will be the vote in the SAN committee. And probably, as we saw from the priority of the Irish presidency in the council, there will be also the reachment of the general approach from the council. And then in early 2027, there will be the voting in plenary of the parliament position, and after that, the starting of the interinstitutional negotiation between council, parliament, and commission. So related to, next slide, please. So related to the, thank you, to the public consultation that I mentioned before. Mainly for those that are not very familiar with the public consultation of the Commission, we prepared this template and guide to help you go through the submission of your feedback. So you can scan this code and you can look at the template. There are a guide on how to submit your feedback, but also some important indications. So, for example, to do not copy and paste directly our position, because like similar other position, if you want to do common submission, because the Commission normally doesn't consider the exact same position. So it's really important that you just change maybe your words. So if you have any question on this, I will be happy to answer. Also, I know that maybe I don't know if Daniel or Clement wants to jump in on adding something on the revision.
I want to say, and I should make our comments available if anybody is interested, but we really support your work and we're appreciative of this forum. The harmonization of policy across the EU to ensure that all remanufactured SUDs are safe and effective is very important. Right now, this is something that's available in Belgium and Germany and the Netherlands, but not in Poland or Slovakia. And the frank reality is the American members of my association, including the original equipment manufacturer members, I know there's a question about this, are not entering the European market and offering the products that they both manufacture and reprocess in the US because we have a fragmented market here in the EU. So to underscore, your point, Ginevra, if we can get stakeholders here to comment the need to harmonize EU regulations, that could go a big way towards ushering in the availability of more collaborative options between reprocessor and OEM to reduce the overall cost, waste, and emissions profile.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this comment, and also Ginevra. Thank you very much for this overview and for sharing this template. So if anyone is interested, you can scan this with your phone, but you'll also receive the slides afterwards, so you can have a look. Because, as Daniel mentioned, it's a really great opportunity now, and we need to work towards more harmonization of the legislation. I see there were quite some questions in the chat. I don't know if anyone of you still wants to answer one of these questions. Daniel, was that a hand up?
Yeah, Tatiana, if you don't mind, maybe a little show and tell would help. I saw some questions about who's responsible, about individual components, about the cooperative relationship between. So just as an example, this is a laparoscopic dissector or a device used to seal vessels. And I don't know if the members, here, I got to put it down. You can see it's labeled as a harmonic by Ethicon. That's the original manufacturer, but you see a unique number in Vanguard's emblem. And then it's very difficult, you see, but that's their tracking number. And so this is a device that's not meant to be disassembled. And so we wouldn't ask a hospital to clean and disassemble something that will probably break. But Vanguard and other reprocessors have spent millions of dollars creating a validation to disassemble, clean, keep track of all of these components. And it's the end responsor's responsibility, should anything fail with this device, to report it as Vanguard's device going on. So I hope this show and tell sort of is helpful to sort of answer some of those questions. This is a device where there is not cooperation between the original manufacturer and the reprocessor. So everything the reprocessor does has to be independent of what the OEM is doing. But there are devices like a Cardinal pulse oximeter sensor in the US that Cardinal both makes and reprocesses and offers a bundle to US hospitals where you might get 4 reprocessed and 2 new, or 3 and 3, but then you get the blended pricing. And we're not yet offering that here in Europe. And if purchasers would demand that the OEMs work with reprocessors, meaning offered a blend, that would really help usher in more resilient solutions as well. So we encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Daniel, also for showing this interesting example. I think if I have a quick look at the chat, then I think there's still some questions, but we're also at the end of this webinar. So I would like to take this opportunity. Thank you all for joining. There were a lot of participants today, so it's great to see all the interest in reprocessing. We had some really good presentations about the impact, the positive impact that reprocessing can have. Also a little bit more about the history, because it's already going on for a long time, which people don't always realize. I hope some of your questions have been answered. And as I said before, we'll share the slides afterwards and the recording. And you are very welcome to also reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you want to submit something during the consultation process. We're happy to support. So thank you all, and have a great afternoon.